Well, chaps, a very brief word, he says. Was it last week? I very briefly got up to 17 subscribers and then lost one. You can only assume it was somebody that had accidentally subscribed to me. I can't imagine it's because I've done any videos that have offended people, because let's be honest, no one watches these videos. But what should be noted, of course, is that not long after Prince Philip's funeral in a couple of weeks ago, I felt compelled to write to Her Majesty the Queen and His Royal Highness Prince Charles, expressing my sympathy. I've never written to the royal family. People who know me might be surprised because of how I am much more of a royalist than some people I know are. But I got a card from Prince Charles. I say from Prince Charles, it is, as you'll see, a pre-printed card, but not one from the Queen. I mean, whatever we think of the man, and especially what he did or didn't do or whatever back in the 90s as far as Princess Diana is concerned, I've always had a deep-seated admiration for Prince Charles. I think he tries to do his best, and when he becomes king, some of that might be lost, because as a monarch you're not allowed to have your own opinions, kind of thing. But at the funeral, I was struck by how he looked as they walked towards the chapel. Prince Harry recently effectively gave the Queen and Prince Charles a good kicking as far as parenting goes, and Prince Charles believed he did not have a proper upbringing at one point, and then it looked, in recent years became quite close to his father. The card writes, as I say, it's a pre-printed message, not handwritten. The Prince of Wales thanks you so much for your very kind message of sympathy. His Royal Highness has been enormously touched by the many generous messages that have been received in recent days. They have provided great comfort at this very sad time. Prince of Wales sends you his warmest thanks and best wishes. And the card includes a photo of a very young Prince Charles with his old man, the late Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Charles, coincidentally, is now the Duke of Edinburgh. Our dukedoms are fairly nowadays honorific. If you're semi-familiar with British history or English history, there's dukes galore. The Duke of Northumberland was effectively in charge when Edward VI was on the throne, until when he died at the age of 15. There are other dukes like Buckingham and so on that have had their moments in the sun, and nowadays it doesn't really mean anything, does it? Of course. Nonetheless, we have a royal family, and hopefully we'll have a royal family for many centuries yet to come. Does it matter? Well, yes and no. As a tour guide on a double-deck bus, the royal family is actually very significant to my job. Not that I'm saying I want a royal family to continue for a job, but as I briefly worked as a tour guide in 2011, only for the summer, and then I did 7 years at M&S, and everyone wants Buckingham Palace. Everyone wants to see change in the guard. No one, for some peculiar reason, wants to see the horse guards. You say, do you want to go and see the Queen's Guard at Horse Guards Parade? And they will look at you blankly. And the few people I've had on a walking tour go, my God, this is great. You can, because you can stand right by the guards. You are a few feet away from them when they do their switch around of a morning. You can see them dismount at the end of the day. Whereas changing to the guard, at the very least, you're 20, 30 feet away. And I'm slightly befuddled by the fact that people don't want to do it, thinking that it's not that interesting, but they want to see change in the guard for all the pomp and circumstance that we do nowadays, do better nowadays than we have done anything else. And they're there every day. Changing the guard is 4 times a week. I mean, it's been going on in COVID just without all the crowds, because of COVID. We're not as subservient to the royal family as we used to be. You know, I've been reading a bit about Charles II lately. I think he's one of my favourite monarchs because I find him so fascinating. But you look at the triple whammy that affected his monarchy between 1665 and 1667. In 1665, he says, there was a great plague, offshoot of the Black Death that entered England in 1345. And there were people complaining about the restrictions and wearing masks and that. But in 1665, the king introduced a law or act known as the Anti-Plague Act, and effectively, if you showed the slightest signs of having plague, you were locked in your house, isolated, and left effectively either to live or to die. The royal family did admittedly leave the capital, but then I wouldn't say it's because they were scared, but monarchy did direct the country in those days. If the king and his heir, well, he didn't have any heirs, did he? If the king and his and the family died, then who's going to lead the country? A year later, as the plague is dying out, the Great Fire happens. One of the worst calamities to affect London, as it was in those days. £9 million of damage, and that is 1660s currency. The king, his brother James, the future James II, driven into exile for being Catholic, and Charles's cousin, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, brilliantly played by Timothy Dalton in the 1970 film Cromwell, took personal charge of directing the firefighting. That wouldn't happen now. If there was a great fire now in London, it would be fire brigade commanders on the ground, police commanders on the ground, and then it goes to the mayor's office, the Lord Mayor's office, and then the national government. The monarchy would have no say in the firefighting. And then the other whammy, 1667, when the Dutch very rather brazenly sailed up the River Medway, where the the Royal Navy, English Navy, was at anchor because there was no money to pay the sailors to keep the fleet going, so they're all moored up, and the only protected I laugh because if it happened nowadays it would be a massive inquiry, but only a rope across the water was keeping these ships safe. The Dutch came up, smashed up a few ships, put a few fire ships in the mix, took the king's flagship, the Royal Charles, which brought him over from exile in 1660 to restore the monarchy to the throne, which was previously Cromwell's flagship in the days of the Republic, the Naseby, and was hastily renamed the Royal Charles to bring Charles, or future Charles II, over. All of that is significant because monarchy, all the way up till really the 18th century, had a much more firmer hand on the country's operation than it does now. We bitch about a government, we don't bitch about the monarchy, as they did up until the Civil War in 1642. So, do we need a monarchy? I mean, I think personally we do, in that it's something intrinsically British, and people say, well, the money we spend could be, better spent elsewhere. We, as far as I understand it, from what I've read, we give the monarchy very little money compared to what we would have given Charles II. Charles II had an annual spend of £10 million, I think it was, and he always overspent. Our national debt actually started with Charles II in the 1660s. Depending on what climate change does, I was born in 1985. If I live to be 100, and I'm not really optimistic that I will, but if I do, at the very least, William will be king. I mean, William was born in 81, 82. It'll either be him or Prince George. And the trouble is, as only pointed out in the book about Prince Charles, is that the Queen has reigned so long now that 97% or whatever of the country have only ever known the Queen on the throne, whereas people like my late grandparents and others of that generation have had, at the very least, been born under George V, very briefly had Edward VIII, then George VI, then the Queen. And that it could cause some trouble when Charles ascends to the throne. Everyone thinks, well, we don't want Charles, you know. I mean, I had somebody on the bus last year before, we got to the palace, and I'm going, you know, when the Queen goes, we will get Charles. And they went, do we have to? And I go, do we have to what? And she goes, well, can't we just have William? It doesn't work like that. It's a line of succession for a reason. It's not a popularity contest. If that was the case, half of the monarchs we've had since 1066 would not have been on the throne. Would you have wanted James II? No. Would you have wanted Charles I? Probably not. But that's how it works. It's not a reality show. It's not a popularity contest. One key thing about Charles is that will he keep his name? Now, royal children, like as you will have seen when George was born, are given something like 4 to 6 first names. I believe Edward VIII had at least 8, and he was known as David. But then when he became king, he was Edward. When George VI ascended to the throne, he was Albert up until then. Always known throughout his life as Bertie. He chose George to honour his father. There's a suggestion that Prince Charles will take the name George to become George VII. Those who believe that he won't, because he's got a grandson called George, do not know their stuff, quite honestly. Because you can choose your name. And that's another thing. You know, I've always known Prince Charles as Prince Charles since I was little. He's suddenly going to change his name in the 70s to George. It could happen. The thing is, Charles does not have, as a monarchical name, great prestige. Charles I was executed after bringing the country into 2 civil wars, and executed for the only monarch to be executed by Parliament. Charles II was known as the main monarch, had 11 illegitimate children, no legitimate heirs to the throne, many mistresses, many whatever, spent money like no man's business, and was not terribly popular for most of his reign. He was when he took to the throne, but he wasn't. So Charles III does not have a nice ring to it. George VII does. William, well, I imagine he will become king as William. That will be William the Fifth. Hopefully last longer than William the Fourth. My mind's gone blank. 17 years before he was succeeded by his niece, Victoria. But you don't know what's going to happen. As is sometimes said on tour, Charles could choke on a peanut next week, and we'll have William when the Queen dies. But hopefully that's all long into the future. We are going to have a few days of celebration next year, because it will be the Queen's 70th year on the throne. No monarch before and probably ever after her has reigned as long. Every day is a record. And she's the oldest British monarch, 95 presently. It's well, who cares, eh? But if you're still watching by now, thank you. This was meant to be a short video. It's almost 15 bloody minutes. Let's get to 17.